Welcome to the Music Teachers in International Schools podcast. I'm your host, Chris Kulma, and I'm a former head of music in international schools in Argentina and Malaysia, and now the director of MTIIS, the global network for music teachers working in the world's international schools. And on this show, we speak to music educators working in international schools, which is kind of a unique educational space that is often little understood. Because, well, it's pretty new and it's grown massively as well in the last 15 or so years, particularly. For long-time listeners of the show, you will know that I often talk about the various types of international schools that might exist, and we'll be exploring this possibly a little in this episode too. And of course, if you're interested in that topic in itself, you can head to the MTIIS website to learn more about international schooling. But today, I'm speaking with Brian White, the director of bands at the American School of Milan. And I first heard about Brian actually through my good friend Ale, who currently works as a Spanish teacher at the same school as Brian. And she said, "You got to get Brian on the show." And I was like, cool, let's look at that. And I actually later met Brian at a conference where we got chatting, which was really cool. Now, Brian is originally from the US, but has worked for the last 20 years in American-style international schools in Singapore, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and now Italy. Now, for me, as an Aussie with a background mainly in British-style international schools, I'm certainly looking forward to learning lots from Brian. So I think we should just get into it. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. This is going to be fun.
So to start off, as I like to do with most of my guests, can you tell us a bit about your background as a musician and a music educator?
So I grew up playing the trumpet. I started in fifth grade, as many musicians do or students do in the United States. We start pretty young there. So fifth grade being like 10, 11 years old. And I played all throughout high school, marching band, pep band, all that stuff. I wasn't super serious about it. I just really enjoyed doing it. And kind of fell into music education. So I do have a little bit of imposter syndrome still after 26 years. I went to university to sign up for course. Actually, prior to that, I'd written to the university and said, "Hey, I'm really interested in still playing the trumpet when I get there. How do I do that? I hear you have non-music major scholarships." And they're like, yeah. And this is way late in the season. So we're talking like March. And if any of your listeners are trumpet players, the professor that I contacted said, just, play a couple of movements with the Haydn trumpet concerto. I'm like, what's that? And I could now I look back and he's probably like sighing into the phone or whatever. So I got it and started learning it. And I auditioned in June. This is like super late. And he said, it was just him and another professor in their Birkenstocks. And they walked out of the room, came back in like, "Yeah, that was all right. Well, how about we give you more money if you become a music major?" And I was like, "Oh, more money? Oh, okay." I was a music major and quickly realized I was so far behind. So I spent undergrad just trying to catch up, and took a few interviews after getting my music ed degree. Still just like, I'm not ready. Because one of the things that my professor told me this is like the fourth week of school, and he dropped a truth bomb. He's like, "You are not going to be a great music educator unless you're a great musician, and you have so far to go." And I was just bawling. It was a tough semester. And so when I graduated, I'm like, I'm not a great musician yet. And I started taking trumpet lessons with a music professor down the road at Illinois State, Dr. Amy Gilreath. And this is over the summer. And she said, "You could come to grad school and study with me. Otherwise, we have to stop the lessons." I'm like, "I can't go to grad school." She's like, "I'm the teacher." Sure. I'm going to say yes, you can get it. So went to grad school as a performance major, just so I could become a better musician. And she was really great. And then she let me adapt the curriculum, knowing I wasn't going to go out and perform. She let me do a graduate recital where it was a lecture recital, where I talked about music for middle school students and high school and even collegiate. So it was really great that she allowed me to do that. I had an amazing experience there. And then I got into teaching. And at that point, I felt a whole lot better because when I struggled in lessons, I could just fall back on those musical skills that I'd learned. And I'm like, oh, I've played at this level before. I can do this and I can show you how to do it. And So that was in the States, in Florida for a bit, and then back up to Illinois, where I'm from, for a bit. And then we heard about teaching overseas through a random conversation in the middle of Innsbruck, Austria. We met a couple that were from Nairobi and are like, "Oh yeah, you teach English," and they're like, "No, no, it's a full, American style school." And I'm like, "What? Tell us more." And so went to a recruiting fair and landed a job in Singapore at Singapore American. Again, completely naive, like we didn't know the caliber of the school. And we show up and we're like, oh, wow, this is really amazing. And we're there for 9 years. And then went to Saudi Arabia for the Saudi Aramco expatriate schools. And then COVID hit, and we'd actually planned to take a gap year anyway. And so the timing was perfect. For most of the COVID years, I didn't have to teach. We were homeschooling my son in Ecuador. And then the job in Milan opened up, and here I am. So it's been quite an amazing experience.
That's a great journey. Just a couple of follow-ups there. So Singapore, how long were you in Singapore?
9 years. I started off, so at the recruiting fair, there was a little note we did search associates, and back then they had these little folders, and there's little notes that Singapore American School would like to interview. And I was looking at all the information. It said it was a part-time. I was like, let's go do a practice interview. And I walk in, and the director of the school was there. He's like, "Hey, it's not part-time anymore." I was like, "Oh, tell me about that." And it was elementary music, and I was like, well, but I had done a year of elementary back in the States. I'm like, well, let's just go for it. It'll be like a lot of international. It'll be a couple of years. We'll just do a couple of years. And that in elementary school position was 1 year, and then the middle school director moved into the high school job, and the middle school job opened up, and then I was 8 more years in middle school. So yeah, that's awesome. And then 8 in Saudi Arabia.
Right. Okay. So 9, then 8. And yeah, and I want to come back to that and the Ecuador bit and now Milan. But before we do that, that conversation in Innsbruck, I mean, how often do we hear that come up, right, in the international school teaching community? And especially the part of, so you're an English teacher, and then you're like, no, 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 and do you find that, that comes up still now, that conversation with people now that you're in the international school world?
Yeah, it does all the time. Although it's interesting. There's a small, like I feel like in international teaching, there's a group of people from Luther, Luther College in the United States. They all know about music teachers, all know about international teaching, and probably because they also have the Iowa Fair that happens that does a recruiting for a lot of students in college. So I'm finding more students younger, music teachers coming in that have heard about it sooner than rather a random sort of, wait, I've never heard. But in the States, no, it's very uncommon to hear about international teaching because like my sister-in-law is coming to visit us, and she's never had a passport before, right? So Americans don't really travel, as we know. So yeah, I hear that conversation all the time.
And I mean, we can cut this if it's not relevant, but what were you doing in Innsbruck then? Were you sort of on a music thing somewhere in Europe, or were you just there traveling?
No, just traveling. My wife had done a semester of study abroad in Vienna and had developed that sort of interest in travel. And when we're in Florida, she had to convince me, like, let's go on a holiday. Great. Where do you want to go? Let's backpack through Europe. I'm like, Europe, it's so expensive. It's so far, like literally it was a year of her trying to convince me. And then the rest is history because I fell in love with like travel and right. So again, in the middle of nowhere, it wasn't even in Innsbruck. It was up on some like romantic mountain hike sort of evening thing in this restaurant with Gerhard. I still remember his name. Gerhard was this guide, and his friend is playing this little accordion, and we're chatting, and there were some other couples that came along, and lo and behold,
there you go.
I wish I knew the name of the couple. I'd like to write back to them and like, thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. That'd be fascinating. Yeah, so Singapore, I mean, we could dig in there, but I'd like to touch on Saudi Arabia a little bit because
Yeah.
now, and especially in the last few years, the country has expanded its international schooling offer massively for a whole bunch of reasons. But tell me a bit about what it was like working in Saudi Arabia and maybe some of your first impressions working there.
Yeah, so I worked for Saudi Aramco expatriate schools. So the Saudi Aramco oil company, the original sort of company that found oil in Saudi. So it's been like the school, I think when I was there, it hit like its 75th year anniversary. It's been around for a long time. It's a great community. It's on the Eastern Province. There are 4 communities where the company has employees. So the schools are only for the children of the employees. I worked in Dahran, which is sort of the headquarters of the company, and it's a smallish. Well, when I say small and I say compound, those two don't kind of correlate, but it's like 11,000 residents in a compound, walled, gated, security. And we moved there. I mean, Singapore was amazing and we loved it there. And we probably could have stayed for a very long time. We still have friends that are there and they've been there for 18, 20 some years. But we also had through, and we'll probably talk about this later, the AMI organization. I had met a director at Elkins who was at Aramco and he was planning on retiring. He's like, hey, I think you'd be a really good fit. We just had a son, and Aramco is known for its community because in these these compound like living, it was like 1950s USA. Everyone had sort of the same similar style house. There were parks everywhere. Inside the community, you had restaurants, bowling alleys, 18-hole golf course, resort style living, but also super safe. So, I mean, literally our son, as he got older, he could, and more independent, he, just like when I grew up, hey, Dad, I'm going out. Oh, great. Be back. Well, when the lights come on and, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock rolls around, he comes running in and friends and family or neighbors, all just look out for all the kids. So that was really amazing, giving him that opportunity to grow up in that community. And we loved it. And the schools there are super well funded, obviously, with oil money. I have a friend who's a professor at Illinois State University, and we have better equipment than he does for his students. So that was amazing. And they really are supportive of music. So all fifth graders had to take band or choir, and we had huge numbers. So my colleague of mine taught fifth grade band, and he had 230 kids in fifth grade band. And then I'd get about 100 of them the next year when it was an elective. So I was running a band program, an American style band program with between 200 and 220 kids, off and on each year in various levels of ensemble. So it's really fun.
Wow. And just to clarify, I think you mentioned this, but the students in the school, were they all American students that were living in Saudi Arabia, or did you have host country nationals in the school as well?
No, yeah. When you looked out at the classes, no, we had no Saudi citizens. Saudi citizens could go to our school up until kindergarten, and then after that, they had to go to local schools because we were again an American style curriculum accredited through an American organization. We only go to ninth grade, and then this company would send students the option to send students to boarding school, which the company would pay for, or there was an academy outside of our compound that if a parent didn't want to send their kid to boarding school, that they could go to that one. But no, to answer your question, so we had it was employees' children except Saudi citizens. So we had I wouldn't say lots of Americans. I don't know the percentage, but when you looked out of the class, very Middle Eastern looking. We had, employees from anywhere in the Middle East, except, I'm sorry, not employees, students from anywhere in the Middle East. We had lots of students from Venezuela because there's an oil economy there. Lots of students from Malaysia, again, the oil industry there in Malaysia. And then lots of students from Canada, and then Americans, and a lot of them from Texas, again, because Aramco is centered, they have another headquarters in Texas where, again, there's an oil industry there. So when I looked out at my classes, I didn't see, I guess, American. It was very, very mixed.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'm glad we cleared that. Yeah, I can imagine
Yeah.
the scenario. Nice. And now Milan. I mean, from, like I said in the intro, knowing Ale, and I've spoken to her a bit about what it's like in the school, and from her experience. But tell us a bit about what it's like in Milan. What's the experience been like living in Italy, and yeah, maybe a bit of info about the school as well.
Yeah. So our goal was always at some point to live and work in Europe. One of the first jobs I applied for internationally was the American School in London. I actually know the guy that got the job. It's super great. He's been there for a long time. And so, when you're living in Singapore, living in Saudi, we're like, it'd be amazing to have one last, job in Europe. And when the Milan one popped up, again, I knew the person who was here through the AMI organization. And he had reached out to the administration and said, hey, I think there's this guy who's taking a gap year. He's looking for a job. I think he'd be a great fit. So we had just started our year off in September, and ready to kind of like decompress from COVID. It was really stressful getting out of Saudi. And then like 20 days later, I get an email, hey, this is the barracks school. Come on, we hear you're looking for. I was like, wasn't quite ready yet, but we went through the process. And so living in Italy has been amazing. It's kind of everything we had hoped for with living in Europe. I love our apartment where we're located. I love the idea that we're always sort of imagining of like, we leave our apartment and 20 steps, there's a grocery, there's a butcher, there's another baker, the candlestick maker, but no, just kidding.
Very good.
But everything is like walking distance here. We don't own a car. We tram and bus it to school. So that's been exactly what we hoped for. There's a park nearby that we can go and hang out. The school is south of the city. It takes us about 40 minutes bus tram to get there, which is a great way to decompress or to get ready for school, kind of wrap your head around it. But then at the end of the day, when you leave, and the working hours are very European. In Saudi, we had to be at work at 7 a.m. Here, school doesn't start till 9. So I think it's much better for students, that later start. And we have an hour for lunch. It's very Italian. We get long lunches. We're not expected to teach at all over lunches or like try to arrange things over lunches. You're completely welcome to take the full hour and just hang out with colleagues. And so that's been great. I love the schedule. It's 55-minute classes, 65-minute classes, on a rotating schedule, which I think is brilliant for students because you're not always seeing the same students first period of the day. We are an IB diploma school, and that has taken some getting used to. So while it's an American style school, we don't offer any AP classes. We do offer an American diploma, but I would say 95% of our seniors graduate with the IB diploma, and then the other 5 just the American style diploma. Merging those two has been difficult for me. Again, I've never taught in an IB school. I understand through colleagues in other schools that often you will lose your 11th and 12th graders because the schedule doesn't really allow them to take an ensemble class. Our school, we have the option, the ability to have them all the way through 12th grade, the way that they run the schedule. And in 12th graders, it's sort of like you'll see them every 3 or 4 days. So they're not fully part of the ensemble. It's not on their schedule, and they don't get credit for it. But it does allow us to have 11th graders in, which is nice. It's a very, very small program. The school has about 950 students in it currently. And one of the things I was looking for when I left Saudi was a small school with a smaller program. I had burnt myself out a bit, just the way I, ran my own program, with having 220 odd students, assigning assignments every week for every one of them and listening to that was kind of my deal. I just got exhausted. And so I was looking for a smaller program, and it's exactly what I'd hoped for. It's much smaller. I'm still struggling again with the IB of growing the program, but it's only my second year. So I've got a lot to learn about, Italian culture and our schedule and how can I get more kids involved. So for example, my advanced band this year is only 14 students. I was able to start a beginning band this year. So last year it was just middle school band, and any kid that wanted to play an instrument was put into that ensemble. So not great curriculum wise in that like you have a beginner who's never played with a kid that's maybe played 3 years. And that can be a struggle in an American style school where it's ensemble based. I was listening to the podcast that you put up a few weeks back with the lady from the UK and the British style, where it is more focused on private lessons and one-on-one. And then they started talking about how Scotland and Wales maybe is getting into the American style where it's ensemble based. And that's one of the drawbacks, is that you don't get that one-on-one time. And sometimes in schools that are just like, oh, here's an ensemble class, then you get like so many varying levels of ability that it's a struggle to meet everyone at their level. And that is something I've tried at every school, is to incorporate an ability-based sort of ensemble setting. So a beginner level class, an intermediate with some sort of audition to get into like an upper advanced level. But I've only taught middle school most of my career. US, it was high school, and now I do have some high school. So again, the struggle is now my high school classes, then anyone in high school that wants to play an instrument kind of gets put in that class. So that it's been a struggle. But still, again, it's only my second year. I'm working everything out, trying to figure out, the best way to get more students involved. There are some things with Italian curriculum too that make it difficult to attract the kids when they're going from fifth into sixth. Because I don't know how deep you want to get here, but in Italy, they all the students have to take. I think this is the same in Malaysia. Maybe I know in Singapore, like there's an exiting exam you take in your younger year, and that kind of determines where you get to go to high school. And so that's called the terza media here in Italy. And so a parent that has an Italian parent, a citizen, sorry, where their student is coming to our school, to get a private education, but they're not 100% sure that they'll stay in a private school setting. Those children have to take a course of study at our school that prepares them for the terza media test, which then removes any sort of electives they can take because they have to take a foreign language and then they take the terza media study. And 45% of our school are Italian nationals. It's capped at 45. So there's 45% of my talent pool in between fifth and sixth that boom, they're gone.
Yeah.
I don't get them. So again, I'm learning like, how can I recruit, and when I've only got 65% of the classes left to kind of draw from. And band students, choral students, those are all the kind of students that they're also doing all the other activities. So we're all trying to grab those kinds of kids.
Yeah,
And it's
especially
hard.
in a small school setting.
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry to jump in there, but I also wanted to touch on two things. One, which we might just park to the side, is the IB element that you've spoken about, which I think I want to dig in a little bit more. But I guess for the British style international school teachers, just to help them maybe a little bit more, because I know in the British style system, we often talk about, in an American style school, it's like this, but often we don't actually know what that is. Like there's a lot of assumptions maybe. So to help us out a little bit, which I think is great for the community, can you take me through like what a typical American style band program structure would be, like elementary, middle into high school? Just give us a quick idea of that.
So in the United States, not only say well-funded, in most schools, a student is supposed to have music as part of their curriculum, kindergarten through, fifth or sixth, whatever it is that they call elementary school in that district. And it's taught by a specialist. So the specials in the United States, PE, art, music, maybe computers now, are usually not pull out. It's time when the teacher will get their planning because they send the whole class to music class or the whole class to PE. So then the teacher has their planning. In some, like when I grew up, in some districts, the way they work it is it's not necessarily their planning time. It might be small group. I'm jumping the gun here. That's more later years. I'll get back to that. So you're right. Elementary, pull out, the whole class goes to music class. And they're working on learning music through like Orff
Yeah,
or
so
Code
general
Eyes.
music.
General music, yeah.
Yeah.
Taught by a specialist that has a degree in music. Sometime in third or fourth grade, a lot of programs will do like a recorder unit. So now they're getting into, playing instrument. In a lot of districts where, again, this is all based on my experience, in fifth and or sixth grade, they'll have the option to take band, choir. Sometimes orchestra is offered a year earlier because the instruments can be shrunk a little bit. That's harder with obviously band instruments. So then a kid can sign up for band in fifth or sixth. And in some districts, it's everyone takes band or choir or orchestra. A lot of places it's a pullout. So, these 4 students from Mrs. Jones' class will go take their trumpet lesson with the band director, for 40 minutes, 30 minutes once a week.
Yeah.
And then often it'll be like, so they're doing all those pullouts, and then maybe once a week, before school, they'll have the large ensemble. So that's one way to do it. Another way is, which often happens, is it's like, here's your class of beginners. You have 60 of them in a room, and now teach them how to play everything.
Yeah, and they'll be doing, like, say in orchestra, the one teacher will be doing violin, viola, cello, bass, and trying to teach everyone at the same time. beginners.
Yeah, that's just the way, it developed after World War II of, a way of, one teacher can cover 60 kids and then that gives all those other teachers their planning period time. That sounds a little cynical, but it's often the way it's approached is that, especially with school funding and, we can have one teacher take care of all these kids. And that's, one less teacher than if they were all in their classrooms. And it's very hard to do, to teach 60 kids, flute, clarinet, trumpet, trombone, but then there are schools that have great funding and great programs where they're doing flute lessons, and they'll have 15 flutes in a room, and then it's tuba lessons. And then I used to listen to a podcast of some band directors from Texas. There's 3 of them at a program in middle school, and they talk about all their sectional lessons and I was like, oh, that's a dream.
That sounds cool.
But that's not often the case. It's often, here's a class full of kids, figure it out. And so we use method books. I don't know if that's a big thing, and where it's sort of playing folk tunes, and they're written so that you can teach all the various instruments all at the same time through short little folk tunes.
Essential elements and standard of excellence, those kind of ones.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Got ya.
So then, that could be your middle school experience, and then high school experience is much the same in the States, where it's either maybe 1 band in high school, or if you're lucky, 2. Sometimes some great programs have 3. Some will have jazz bands involved at the larger programs. Some will have 2 directors covering all that. But again, ensemble based most often, where you're sitting in front of the whole group. And I feel like the American curriculum is often performance based. I think the development of school band programs was the performance is a huge aspect of it, especially in high school where you're doing marching band and pep band, and you're there every Friday night at the basketball game or the football game, and then Saturday competitions with marching band. And so it's not unusual for a high school marching band director to have like 30, 40, 50 performances a year with their students, one a week, sometimes 2, a parade on Saturday, very entertainment based.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, I think that gave us a really good overview of that. Going back to the IB thing you spoke about before, so incorporating that now into Milan, small school, obviously your band program is the way it is, you're developing it, and it sounds like a great challenge. Like, I'm excited to hear where it goes. But how does IB then work? And are you offering IBDP music? Is that an option? Will it be an option? Where's that up to?
We did offer it, and I didn't have to teach it. When I first arrived, we had an IBDP class, and it was the last cohort because there were only 2 kids in it. And the school decided that's not, we can't have one teacher allocated just for these 2 students. So they dropped the DP music program this year. I don't know if it's coming back. Again, the program took a huge hit from COVID. And so the numbers in all of the groups are small, which then lends itself to less kids in music, and then not enough kids wanting to take the IBDP option. So I don't know if that's going to be in place. I don't know if that's coming back, or we're in discussion about it, but we just have to build the numbers first and get the kids interested in music before we can even put that back on the table. So we'll see. I don't know much. Again, my first school, I don't know anything about the IB music curriculum, except that a couple of years ago, it completely changed. And it's much different. I do, from what I understand, I think it's more inclusive. It's a lot less theory based. And here, come in, let's analyze this Mozart symphony. It's more creative, composing based, and meeting students more at their incoming level of music knowledge. So, I mean, that's encouraging, I believe.
Which brings me to a question that I was really interested in with your kind of 20 years in international schools. How has your approach to teaching band evolved over the years? And how maybe has international schooling and whatever that means to you contributed to any of those shifts?
That's a good question. And it's a tough one to answer. I know that I have shifted, especially at the IB school. Again, so for your teachers that are really like IB and are really into it, again, my first school, I look out at my students and I see how stressed they are, and that my class offers them a chance to de-stress. And so, in Singapore, very focus driven band director that I was, super high level performances, super hardworking students. I could say, hey, we really need to learn this in middle school, grade level 3 piece. here it is. And then they'd go home and like, practice it. And that's not the case here. I'm finding here in Milan at an IB school, the kids are so overwhelmed with the curriculum that I'm doing the practice for them in class. And the way the schedule is at 65 minutes, I feel like that offers us the time. And the rotating, I see them 4 times a week, 3 or 4 times a week. So I'm very not the director I was 20 years ago, where assignment every week, and you have to have it at a 90% or higher level. I use smart music. Had been using smart music for decades. Even when it was the old Vivace system with the little cartridges, you'd buy the Mozart, whatever, and plug it in a cartridge like the old Atari games. And there's your backing track.
Can you help me out? And sorry if the listeners are like, Chris, you should know this, but tell me more about smart music. Just what is that?
Smart music was originally designed as a standalone smart accompaniment system. So you would own the Haydn trumpet concerto piece of music, but you would buy a cartridge that had the piano part. And it wasn't just like a tape. It would actually listen to you. It was one of the first systems that would listen to you, and it would slow down or speed up the accompaniment based on, so you could add rubato in and it would follow you.
Cool.
And then that started to develop into an online system where they started putting the method books in there. So they had the rights to put the music on the screen. And now you could access thousands of pieces in the software. And again, it listens to you and follows you. And then they introduced, it would grade the student. It would say, oh, you missed that note. And it would show you which note you missed. And so I could open up, we'd be in class and we'd work on line number 15 or whatever. And then I could say, okay, that's your assignment for the week. You need to play it smart music. You need to get a score of 90% or higher. And then you'd hit the submit button. And through the software, it would send that grade and that recording to me. I could listen to it and I could be like, okay, yeah, smart music didn't really quite catch that you didn't articulate anything because it can't really hear slurs and articulations. So while you think you scored at 90, I'm going to score it at blah, blah, blah. Please resubmit it. And so I use that adamantly in Singapore and in Saudi Arabia. And here, again, I look out at my class and the kids just walk in just like, and it's a chance for me to just have a lot of fun with the students and get them to connect and de-stress. And I kind of do their practicing for them. Not ideal. I mean, it limits the kind of music I feel like we can do, and we take longer to learn it. So that's how I've changed over the many years of teaching. Yeah.
That's a really nice reflection. Do you have any reflections on how that's, well, where do I want to go with this? Because I mean, music for well-being and the conversations around that are huge, right? At the moment, it seems to be something that comes up a lot in music's role in schools. Does that play into your philosophy in any way as a music educator? Like, have you always been on that train of thought with music for well-being, or is this something that's really shifted since being in Milan?
No, I think deep down, even during those decades where I was like very driven, very focused on students achieving high levels of technical skills, I still feel like at my core was music was a way. I feel like in international schools, the ones I've worked at, they're very high-powered families, expensive schools, driven students. They're not most likely going to go into music as a career. They're often going, to Ivy League schools and doctors, lawyers, business. And so I never saw my classroom as we're going to teach you all of the theory you need to know to be successful to go into a music program. I saw it as, because it was, again, my approach coming from like, I just really enjoyed playing in my high school band, never thinking it was going to become a career. That's the sort of experience I wanted for my students, is that there's this thing you can do at school where you can take that little thing that you're doing and put it with 50 other kids and get goosebumps on a daily basis. You can hit that perfect chord in middle school. It doesn't happen that often. and then just everyone, you can see they kind of, hey, that sounded really good. And then just that also music is this way to teach independence, to teach self-confidence, to teach, how to take something difficult, break it down, There's this, I just remembered, I interviewed this lady earlier in the year. Again, you can cut this from the podcast if it's just too much, but she's from the States and she has her own consulting firm. She used to work for like New England Conservatory in admissions. And she started her own consulting firm of getting students scholarships for music school. And she said a majority of her clients are non-music majors because in the States, if you think about like Harvard, they have a music program. They need to fill their ensembles with musicians. Harvard's not a school, I feel like, where, it's not a conservatory style school. So they have these scholarships to fill their ensembles, non-music major scholarships. And it just so rang true when I was talking to her about this. Like, she helps students tailor their resumes or their applications to show the skills that they have learned by being a musician. And little stuff like, musicians are really good at taking criticism because from the very beginning, it's like, hey, no, that wasn't right. That's an F sharp. Try it this way. Oh, yeah, that finger. Okay. On a daily basis, they're getting that criticism and that help at becoming better, and they don't take it personally. Where she says other students that haven't had that experience are terrible at taking criticism. And so employers are looking for, colleges are looking for students that have that ability. She said, like the idea of working with a professional, students take private lessons. They're working with professional musicians on a weekly basis. And other students, they just don't have that experience. They show up and, they're working with professors now that they don't know how to interact with them very well. She said even like medical schools highly covet music because of their technical skills. Like they have students showing up to med school who don't know how to use their hands and just physically are less apt or adept at manipulating things, like with surgeons. And I listened to all that. I was like, that is amazing. Like that. I mean, we all know that music does that stuff, but to have someone from the outside say, hey, I can get student scholarships for music school, not to become a music major. And there's universities, she said there's millions of dollars every year that go unused because people just don't know about this stuff. So going way back to your original question. So I also see my classes as that sort of growing and learning experience of just having a great time learning about music through the process of performing it together and having fun. So I've struggled with that too over the years. Like I don't teach my kids enough theory. My middle schoolers didn't walk out of my class knowing all 12 major scales. They don't know all their minors. And I still wonder, like, should I have done it differently? But I don't know. I think I hope that my students will look back and be like, I just had a great time. I really enjoyed my band experience. I'm so glad I stayed in it the whole time I was at the school.
I liked that segue that you went on, and I think that's really valuable for the community because I think you're right. We know this stuff, or we hear these kinds of, I don't know, arguments, for want of a better word, about the value of music potentially, but to hear it from the outside can be really useful and kind of affirming in so many ways. Can I just clarify two more things about the band program? In your current school, so you take the band, and we're talking wind band here, right?
Yeah.
Are those students taking private lessons one-to-one as well, or are you teaching them all in the class?
Yeah, I have I wouldn't even say a handful. Out of I would say I probably have 40 kids in band. Probably 5 of them are taking lessons.
Right.
Again, I'm still getting used to the culture here in Italy, and this could be really ignorant. I'm fairly new here. It feels like 45% of our school are Italian nationals. That in Italy, they're all required to take some sort of music, but it's often music appreciation. There's not an ensemble based program in Italian local schools, very much lecture style classes. And so then the music component is a lecture style music appreciation course. And then if a student wants any sort of instrument or choral experience, they have to go outside of school to do that. And that I'm finding is also very similar to the other international schools here in Milan, where music might be required in the elementary levels, but in the middle and high school, it's an elective, not even elective, it's like a club after school. And so you might have a band, they call it band, but it's just any kid that plays an instrument. So you could have a bunch of guitarists with this, some string players and a few wind players and the drum set player.
Yeah.
So I think our school is very unique in that we're an IB, and IB is super popular here in Milan. We're an IB school that offers IB diploma, but we also have a full-time choral teacher who teaches piano, but also a middle school level choir and a high school level choir, a full-time band director that does 3 levels of bands, plus I teach rock band and guitar class, and then an orchestra teacher as well that doubles with elementary. So I think that's unique to Milan, and that's one of our selling points is that we offer during the day curricular courses in music. In addition, we have all the arts, we have drama, we have all kinds of during the day programs. So to go back to the original, do my kids take lessons? No, I wish they did. In Saudi, we didn't have any lesson teachers. I mean, instrumental music was not part of the local culture. And so I started an online lesson program early on there. And so we had probably out of the 200 some kids, maybe 30 of them taking online lessons. And this is pre-COVID. So it was a hard sell at first because parents are like, no, it's better if it's one-on-one. And I'm like, we don't have anyone here that can teach private lessons. And so I had a teacher in Singapore, I had a teacher in Puerto Rico, I had a teacher in San Diego, all over the place. And so that worked there, and it was great. And those students, obviously the one-on-one time makes the difference. Because again, in they're getting feedback in a large ensemble, but it might be like, oh, I notice you're not doing this. You get like 10 seconds to give them because you've got 30 other kids you're trying to. So that one-on-one time is great. So we're, again, new here, trying to develop that. We'll see if it happens. I don't speak Italian either, so that's a little difficult because while English is spoken at the school, most of Milan is Italian speaking until you start to get in the downtown area. So the default is Italian, and you'll ask if they speak English, and they'll say, no, not really. And they do understand more than they let on, but you really need to know Italian to sort of navigate the culture here.
Which is cool in a way, isn't it? Like having that, I guess, pressure, if you like, to be immersed and learn the language kind of quickly to survive. How are you going with it? Are you getting there? Is your Duolingo score going well as also?
It's very slow because, again, everything's in English at school.
Yeah.
So, 80% of your day, and you come home and you don't really have to interact, at home. So I'm taking lessons, and it's slow going. We're doing a language course this summer, an intensive week long. But really, I need to do the one-on-one lessons myself.
This is good. So I was thinking, I mean, it seems like a pretty clear evolution for you, but also very much based in the context of the schools you've worked in. Like they've really seemed to have impacted where you've taken things. But I love how you fed all the way back to your experience in school and what music was like for you and how that comes through in your teaching. Well, I've got 2 parts to this question. One is more for you. What do you see as your kind of future trajectory as a music educator? And then maybe a second to that is more generally, like, what do you see as the future of music education?
For myself, I think this is my last posting. I'm 51, and like we mentioned pre-podcast when we started the recording, the goal is to get my son through high school here and off to college. And then after that, who knows? You can get residency after 6. Italian bureaucracy, it takes a long time to get it. Actually, you can start at 4 years applying for it, and then it takes a few years to get it. Because I don't feel connected to the US anymore after spending 20 years overseas. And the idea of retiring there just is not appealing to myself and my wife and our family. And so I'd love to be able to stay in Europe. That means I need to work here long enough to get residency. And then after 10, I believe you can apply for citizenship. So I'm here for the longer haul, but it is probably going to be my last posting. I'd like to grow the program to something where it's still small. It will never be one of those huge, massive programs like I've taught at, but I would like to have ensembles of, like 25-ish members. I think there's this threshold that you can reach where if it's too small, the kids feel more exposed and they don't have that confidence. Like I always do a chamber ensemble unit. I'll segue here for a second. And we just had some performances this week. And there was a day when one of the students was missing. I played his part. It was in rehearsal. The kid sounded great. They came back, the kid was there, they played in front of a little elementary school class, and they just bombed it. It was terrible. I hope they're not listening right now. I told them that in a very kind way. And then we did another performance. We're doing these pop-ins where we just run over to the elementary, play for 3 minutes, run back to our classroom.
Nice.
And a different student was missing, and I played in the performance. And again, they nailed it. And I spoke to him afterwards, and I was like, you guys all know your parts, but this is what chamber music does for you, is you have to learn that confidence. And me introducing the confidence, you guys just all stepped it up. So that was a great moment for them. And I just really I still enjoy playing. So I'm going to hopefully be here like 10 years, retire in Europe somewhere. And what do I see as the future of music education? I still feel I wish there was a way to marry the two systems. I've talked at length with, because in Singapore, we had a music service like they have in the UK come out to our school. The associate principal trumpet of the Singapore Symphony started a music service for Singaporean students where he brought these instructors over from the UK, started a company, and he would send teachers out to these schools. And we jumped on board. So we had private lessons after school. Again, I wish there was a way to marry that UK system of like one-on-one time during the day and the ensemble session, meetings during the day. Because I still believe that the American-based ensemble is a great experience. Kids get to make music more often with their peers and enjoy that performance of getting up in front of people. Whereas I feel like from the limited, from what I know of the UK system, it's more one-on-one with the teacher. And yes, their skills are amazing and have this leveled system. And whether it's ABRSM, where they're leveling up and passing off tests, if they could marry that somehow, again, during the day, so kids aren't having to come after school, parents aren't having to pay extra for that sort of experience, but that the ensemble is the core of the music ed experience with the sort of offshoots, with the private lessons. And then I really think music ed needs to like branch off, and again, that ensemble is the core, but we're offering like DJing classes. We had a club at my last school where a guy who's a social studies teacher, I think it was, really into DJing, and he taught a club course during lunch, and super popular. And then those kids went out and they DJ'd all of our dances. So practical. The rock band class I started at our school has been super popular and successful. And again, it's a performance based. So we're playing at least twice a month. We did a gig out at a club. We packed this bar. European laws with regards to students and clubs, very relaxed here. Parents were all on board, but we packed a club with students, their parents, and their friends. We're going to a recording studio next month to do a recording session. So, I mean, offering those experiences that I think our students are wanting to have, popular music-based sort of, but again, keeping that sort of core ensemble-based traditional experience at the center of our program is what I feel the future for our students in music ed.
Yeah. Nice one.
Yeah.
Okay. Last question, but it could take us in a few different directions because it's kind of bringing in, it's a broad question, and I try and ask this to lots of people. The question is, what would you say makes then a good international school music teacher?
Right. I think my experience has been unique in that I've been able to work at schools that have a band program through the AMI organization. And if your listeners aren't familiar with the Association for Music in International Schools, it's been around decade, like since I'm not even going to say because I'll probably get it wrong, but it's an amazing organization founded by two teachers when they were at American School of London, just wanted that sort of large honor band sort of festival. And it started there in the UK, where they bring in members from different schools and spend 3 or 4 days preparing music and then a gala concert. And that has grown to this amazing organization that hosts like 18 different events per year, 20 different events per year, different levels, high school, middle school, elementary. There's a composition portion. I'm on the board of it. It's fantastic.
And just to jump in, to make sure people hear it, we'll put it in the show notes as well. But AMI, just to be really clear, is AMIS. It's the French pronunciation of the acronym, I guess.
Yes.
AMI, AMIS-online.org.
Yes.
And it's, as Brian just said, primarily student festivals and a big organization and a fantastic one to get involved with. So AMIS-online.org.
Any international music teacher needs to be involved or a member of that organization. They do offer a yearly conference, a music educators conference that has presentations, again, elementary through high school in all different kinds of subjects, IB offerings. Again, an amazing organization. But through that organization, I met teachers that, again, were at schools that they could be like the band director, the orchestra director, and made those connections so that I could teach at or hear about openings at those types of schools. So again, going back, I think it's a unique experience, and I've only had to teach band, but I think a great music teacher just getting started needs to be adaptable to do pretty much anything. You could be the music teacher at the school. There's a fantastic colleague, also an Illinois native, teaching up in Aberdeen, Scotland, who is the music teacher and does general music, choral, instrumental stuff, all grade levels. And I think that's more of a common experience than I'm the band director at my school, and that's all I have to teach. So I think international music teacher needs to be flexible, adaptable to being able to teach about anything, any sort of music course. And then that also applies to living in foreign countries. Coming to Italy is amazing, and everyone thinks, wow, living in Europe, but the bureaucracy here is terrible, and getting anything done can take weeks. And so just, learning about patience, and you're not going to have the things that you might want and exactly when you want it to happen. So that's super important for living overseas. Yeah. So
cool. Well, this has been really fascinating, Brian. Like, I've loved the journey. I think we've covered so much, and we probably could have covered more as well. I've got copious notes that we could probably extend this conversation further, but I think we'll leave it there unless you had any other thoughts, questions, comments you wanted to add before we start wrapping up.
No, this has been great talking to you. I always enjoy, talking about my experience, because I truly have felt that teaching overseas is the best thing that ever happened to me. I honestly, and I didn't mention this, but after 6 years of teaching in the States, I was about ready to quit. Again, that American style ensemble performance space has, it's a double-edged sword, because now you're expected sometimes, well, most of the time, to play every Friday night at every basketball game, at every football game, to be at this ceremony, to do that ceremony. And that just got exhausting. And when I found out about international teaching, I was like, there's no marching band? Whoa, this is and so it like I said, I really enjoyed talking about it, just because I hope that we can convince more, especially from the States, where it's not, like originally when we first started talking, it's not a thing that people know about. I've had colleagues be like, shh, don't tell anyone because they're going to take all the jobs. And I'm like, no, it can help people have more fulfilling and longer careers in this field. So thanks for giving me the opportunity to share. I really appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure. If anyone wants to get in touch with you to ask more questions, I'm thinking people might have questions about all sorts of things, but specifically around band programs, maybe even how you've incorporated the IB approach in a school with band, how you've evolved things and bring rock band in, and all the sort of things you touched on. It could be lots more there. How should people, if they want to get in touch with you, is there a way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, you can share my email address in the podcast show notes. You want me to say it out loud here, or is that?
No, we'll put in the show notes after. That's perfect. And if people want to get to the show notes, that's mtiis.co, and Brian's episode will be front and center. If you're listening to it, you most likely will be hearing it as soon as it sort of comes out, and you can just click through and we'll have his email address there. And if anyone obviously wants to know more about Italy and needs a guide in Milan, can they, reach out?
Yep. No problem.
Where's the best food? Where's the best gelato?
Oh, I got a long list. I've put on a few pounds since coming here. So
this is one of the conversations we probably could have gone down the rabbit hole of, which comes up on this podcast all the time. What's the best food in the country you're in?
Oh my God. Well, yeah, everyone will give you different recommendations, but it's It's been fantastic.
I just have to keep reminding myself this is a music podcast, not not a food. Maybe we should change it. Just a international school food podcast. Brian, thanks again. Really appreciate your time, and let's keep in touch.
All right. Thanks, Chris. I appreciate it. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Music Teachers in International Schools podcast. Listen to other episodes by visiting mtiis.com or learn more about our community on Facebook by simply searching for Music Teachers in International Schools. If you know someone who you think I should get on the podcast, I'd love to hear from you. You can find me at chriskoelma.com, ChrisKoelma.com. See you next time.